caring professionals who speaks English and Latin American countries or where the Spanish is spoken as a language, feel free to leave your questions in the chat section, everyone. Anytime you have a questions while Eduardo is presenting, you can leave this in a chat section. At the end, we will have about 15 minutes or 20 minutes for you to ask this question. Rita will keep an eye on your question. We'll take one after each question, and Eduardo will attempt to answer in English as well as if you like in Spanish also. He has a BS in safety from Northern Illinois University, MS in IH from Texas A&M, which is one of the best university. He became CIH in 2005, CSP in 2017, 25 plus years of experience in petrochemical construction with several corporations and companies at Panama Canal Authority. Currently, he's heading EHS role as a global HS manager at Ericsson. He has presented papers at more than 30 conferences, seminars, lectures, and so on, and a great human being to work with. It was a pleasure to get to know him. With that introduction, am I missing anything, Rita, in terms of introduction?
No, I think we've covered everything. Thanks so much.
Super, excellent. So I'm going to also hide my video. And then Eduardo, over to you.
Thank you, Maharshi, for those really kind words. I'll stay with the great human being. That's probably the best quality one can ask for, right? So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's really truly a pleasure to be here talking to such a wide international audience on the topic that I really enjoy, which is the ototoxicants. And let me just briefly say a few words about how, why am I here talking about this? Because I am not a researcher. Right, so I don't work at a university, investigating chemicals that impact the human ear. This basically comes from participating in a health and safety conference, I don't know, about 10, 12 years ago, and the head of Latin America for occupational health for Procter & Gamble, he was talking. It wasn't even about. It wasn't a talk about ototoxicants. He was talking some other subject, but he happened to mention something about chemicals that created some enzymes in the inner ear and that caused damage over time.
Wow.
And by that time I already had, the master's in industrial hygiene, and I was already a certified industrial hygienist. And I was just remember sitting there thinking, wow, I supposedly I have all this education and I've never heard about this. So after the conference, I approached him. I talked a little bit about him. I talked to him a little bit about this, and that just led me to read as much as I could about the subject. I got really interested into it. I got really interested in it. I was talking to some other colleagues in the oil and gas industry, for example, and they were not too aware of this subject. So it's not something like that we're paying enough attention. It was my sense at the time. So that's why I went on this crusade, basically, I call it that, to make sure that as much of the EHS, OHS community would learn about the subject and include them in be part of their risk assessment, right? Because I think we need to have this knowledge shared. And as many times as I've done talks with ototoxicants, I always get the comments of yeah, this is new, or this is something I hadn't paid much attention to. I have ototoxicants in my workplace, and I hadn't really included them in the risk assessment for hearing loss. So I just believe it's a topic that it needs to be. We need to be more aware. So hopefully you'll get that from this talk. So let's go to the next. So this is the agenda for the presentation. We're very briefly going to define ototoxicants, and then we're going to go into the causes of hearing loss that could happen from exposure to noise and exposure to ototoxicants. Okay, so this is just going to be a review of how the many different ways we have for causing hearing loss inside the human ear. Then we're going to go into the classification of these substances and what are the effects when you have dual exposure, meaning you're exposed to an ototoxicant and you're also exposed to noise. You could imagine that there are many workplaces where we have this situation. I'm also going to talk about some of the limitations in the research, and then obviously we have to go into control measures, right? So what are the recommended controls for a workforce exposed to ototoxicants? So that's basically the talk today. The definition of an ototoxicant or ototoxic substance is very simple. It's just a chemical that can be inhaled, absorbed, or ingested, and would cause damage to the inner ear components. Any of the many components of the inner ear. So we're not just talking about like the hair cells within the cochlea. We're talking about the whole inner ear can be components of the whole inner ear can actually be damaged and cause hearing loss by chemicals that can be either inhaled, absorbed through the skin, or ingested. That's basically the definition that we have for ototoxicants. And then what causes hearing loss, right? So we know noise causes hearing loss. We're going to learn a little bit more about, ototoxicants that could also cause hearing loss. And this is by no means this is new. We have the first documentation of a chemical causing hearing loss being absorbed through the skin, actually, going all the way back to the 11th century with Avicenna, a Persian philosopher. He documented the treatment of head lice using mercury vapors. So he was able to establish the connection between the people that were receiving this treatment, head lice with mercury vapor, having sort of like a side effect, if you will, of causing hearing loss. There's also some other documentation from the 19th century regarding quinine and chloroquine inducing temporary hearing loss. But really in the 1970s is where we see a greater numbers of studies in the occupational setting being devoted to this type of substances and the effects that could have on the inner ear. And then in the 1980s, we see a little bit more about this dual exposure, right? So the synergistic effects of noise with ototoxicants. And from what I've been able to read, my understanding is that, for example, Australia and Brazil, hopefully somebody here can confirm that, or maybe add another country where it's already established in the laws, in the claim laws, that you can get compensated if you can tie your hearing loss to ototoxicant exposure. So that's within the occupational illnesses that have been established. It's not only hearing loss due to noise, but also hearing loss due to ototoxicant exposures. I do have to say that there's, some of the research that I'm going to cite comes from the pharmaceutical literature, because there's lots more studies done on medications and side effects that include hearing loss. So medications that you may take orally that also have a side effect, as a side effect, hearing loss. So that's in the pharma industry, this is very, very well documented. Not everything translates to the occupational setting, and that's why I mean that in the 70s and 80s there was sort of like this surge in this type of research. Okay. Just to calibrate ourselves, make sure we're on the same page, because I am going to speak about some of the inner ear components. So just want to make sure we all understand the mechanics here. You know, you get the sound waves that hit the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane sort of absorbs some of that pressure and acts as a regulator, as well as the 3 little bones inside the ear. Some muscles here are involved to be able to tighten and loosen some of these components within the middle ear, and then all that pressure that is regulated down goes into through the oval window. It goes into the cochlea, where we find the hair cells, right, or the stereocilia. This is in a chamber with a gelish liquid that sort of like moves with the waves that mechanically move the hair cells inside the cochlea. That movement is then translated into electrical impulses that the auditory nerve takes to the brain. The brain interprets that as, right now, me talking about ototoxicants. All right, so just want to make sure that everybody's clear on or a refresher. Going back to our early classes, a refresher of this is how the ear in a nutshell works. I think it's just amazing how all this happens. But I wanted to review some of the inner ear components, because we are going to be talking about that in a few minutes. I love this image. This is an actual image of the cochlea and part of the middle ear. You can see the spiral shape there, and just get a sense of how small not only the cochlea is, but imagine how small are the hair cells or the stereocilia inside there. And this is the part of the ear that is connected to the brain through the auditory nerve. Just for just visibility purposes. So how do we lose our hearing? There's basically 3 ways, three categories of ways that we can lose our hearing, the etiology of it. And I think most of us are going to be very familiar with the mechanical way, which is caused only by noise. So it's exclusively a noise thing, a pressure thing, mechanical way of losing. But there's also other ways, other categories, which involve chemicals and also other processes. So this is the 3 categories that I'm gonna discuss now. So the mechanical, biochemical, and metabolic processes that could happen in the ear when noise and or chemicals, ototoxicants, are involved. So the mechanical one, I'm not going to spend too much time. I think this is the one everybody is very familiar with. It's just loud noises, too much pressure. It hits the hair cells in the cochlea. It could be acute or chronic, temporary hearing loss due to that, either temporary or permanent damage to the hair cells, all the way up to being completely destroyed and losing hearing on a permanent basis, right? But then, and this is basically what it looks like under electron microscope, right? You have, let me get my lesson pointing here. You have the inner hair cells, which are in a single row file, right? And then you have the 3 rows of outer hair cells. This is a view of, I think it's a guinea pig. I don't remember if it's a guinea pig or a rat, which have very, very similar inner ear workings and components as the human ear. Okay, it's very, very similar. So they have the inner ear in a single row file, and then you have the 3 rows of outer hair cells. They're in a V shape, and you can see the destruction, right? when they get hit by loud noises, and it's sweeping, right? It's, it's not gonna, this is again the inner file, the row, inner hair cells row, and then the outer hair cells, which are like completely gone. And I want you to remember this picture because the damage looks different when it is from noise versus ototoxicants. Okay, this is sweeping and it's across the whole bed of the cochlea when we're talking noise, and you'll see later on that it looks different. The damage looks different when we're talking ototoxicants. Okay, so then we go, that was mechanical. Then we go into the second part, biochemical. And we basically have two processes there, the enzymes that act as vasoconstrictors. So it basically reduce the diameter of the vessels that are bringing blood and oxygen into the inner ear. So if you reduce the flow by reducing the diameter of the hair cells, then that's going to cause some damage. Some damage eventually over time is going to cause some damage to our ability to hear. So these are the enzymes that this head of occupational health for Procter & Gamble was talking about when I was listening to that conversation, right? So this started my path down this whole thing about ototoxicants. So that's one way we can lose our hearing, is just basically just reducing the blood flow, therefore reducing the oxygen that we get, that the inner ear gets exposed to. That's one way, one biomechanical process. The other one is called oxidative stress. So here I have to, I'll do my best to explain this one. It's a little bit complicated, but I'll try to make it very simple. All right, so either noise or ototoxicants are going to increase the metabolic activity within the hair cells. So think about, if we have more noise, we have more pressure waves going into the inner ear. So that's going to make our hair cells move more. So they're going to get excited, right? The same thing can do ototoxicants, can just basically excite the hair cells, creating more movement, right? They're going to be just moving more from side to side. So if we follow that process within the cell's mitochondria, this is the breathing mechanism for the hair cell, right? So just like humans, we breathe in oxygen and we exhale carbon dioxide. These cells, what they exhale, are called, there are some free radicals that are called reactive oxygen species, or to a lesser extent, reactive nitrogen species. So they're called ROS or RNS. So think about it like this. If I start running, I'm going to start, my breathing apparatus is going to start working harder. So I'm going to need more oxygen, and I'm going to start releasing or exhaling more carbon dioxide, right? So the analogy here is that at the cellular level, the hair cells, they're going to be doing the same thing. They're going to be activated. They're going to be working harder. So they're going to be naturally producing this reactive oxygen species, but they're going to be doing it at a higher level. That higher level, or ROS, that is produced actually causes a type of death that is called apoptosis on the same cells. So this is a type of suicide of the cell. So, we are producing more of a chemical or of a radical that we produce naturally, but because we are producing more of it, that higher concentration actually causes a type of death, cell death, that is called apoptosis. So we start killing hair cells one by one, and if this goes on continuously, well, then we have an issue with our hearing. So hopefully I have explained that as best I can. Hopefully I'd make that understood. So this overproduction of ROS can be sudden and temporary, but there's evidence that it could last for many days. So imagine being exposed to noise today. or being exposed to an ototoxicant today, and then I get out of that exposure, but the damage is already done. Not only for that present moment, but for days afterwards. The overproduction of these radicals, ROS, and to a lesser extent RNS, are going to continue for many days and continue to cause damage. So there's an issue here. So this is a picture. So we go back to that picture of how the hair cells were damaged by noise, mechanical mechanisms, if you will, and it was, the damage was sweeping. It was across the board. And here's a picture from a study from 1999, so 25 years ago, of toluene exposure. And there you can see the effects of what the scientist calls apoptosis. So on the left-hand panel, you see the inner ear cells, the 3 rows of outer hair cells. This is before exposure, and then after exposure to toluene, you see the areas that have the stars. This is the damage caused by the overproduction of ROS, and you can see that it's very spotty. It's very localized. So it's not the same as mechanical. It's not sweeping. It's just, you look at this one. This group of hair cells is still healthy, while the ones right next to the left and to the right are completely gone. The same as this one over here. So this is how hearing loss happens through oxidative stress, which can happen from exposure to noise, but also from exposure to chemicals. Let me jump to this one, which is showing 3 panels, and is showing the green, the red dots are the stereocilia, the hair cells within the cochlea, and the green is showing the formation or the generation of this radical oxygen species, and how it continues for days past the exposure. So you can see, obviously, it's very high, very concentrated immediately post-exposure to noise, but then it continues to be generated even 4 days after the exposure. So 4 days without exposure to noise, but it still is being generated and causing damage. And here's just a picture of just how that apoptosis process is ongoing, which is, is literally killing cells one by one. So it's not really sweeping. And then the third is the metabolic type, which it then affects different parts of the inner ear, not just the hair cells. So it can happen through, noise, or exposure to ototoxicants can decrease the levels of antioxidants, making the ear more vulnerable to noise and the sound pressure waves from noise. It can also literally just poison hair cells. This is an interesting one. It can disrupt the transmission signal that goes from the cochlea to the brain. So earlier in the presentation, we talked about the auditory nerve, right? That takes the signal, converts the signal from a mechanical to electrical, and takes it to the brain. Well, chemicals can directly affect that particular nerve. And then you would be able to hear sound, but not interpret what I'm saying, basically. So that's another way of impacting your ear. There's also some calcium regulation issues that can affect the length of the hair cells. So the hair cells are not going to grow to their normal size, and obviously that's going to have an effect on how they move, and then how can they generate those electrical signals. And then there's also, and I want to stop and take a little deep dive on this one, on the last one, and how ototoxicants can actually impact the muscles in the inner ear. So this is this next slide here. Okay. So the black arrow is again, a picture of the inner ear. You got the tympanic membrane, the three little bones, and then you have a muscle, a very tiny muscle that is called the tensor tympani. This muscle, its only purpose is to tighten the tympanic membrane. As you can see, there is connected to the tympanic membrane. Sorry, it's connected to the bone that is attached to the tympanic membrane. And its only purpose is to tighten the tympanic membrane when pressure comes in, right? Pressures from sound comes in. If that muscle is not working, the tympanic membrane cannot tighten, and then the pressure that hits the membrane is just going to continue on through and push even harder into the cochlea, right? So there are ototoxicants that target that specific muscle, rendering it obsolete. And that's how you get hearing loss, because then all the sound pressure waves can just go through the inner ear directly into the cochlea without being regulated by the tympanic membrane. So this is what we're dealing with. This is what we have to do more research on to be able to better understand these processes, and then obviously, come up with a way to stop it. So that's it. That's about what I wanted to say regarding how we lose our hearings. And now we're going to talk about the ototoxicants, which is, I think, what many of you came here to talk. So the first thing came here to listen, sorry. The first thing I need to say is that from the research that I've been able to obtain, read, study, there are many ways of calling ototoxicants. Some researchers or some entities that comes out with lists of ototoxicants, they can say it's an ototoxicant or not, or they can say it's confirmed or has the potential, or they can say it's a suspect ototoxicant, or questionable, or possible, or non-conclusive, because there's still some issues with the limited amount of research that it's available. So with this, I want to say that you have to be careful at what entity are you going to follow. So we have people from all over the world here, and there are entities from all over the world, from Australia, from the European Union, from the United States, that from Canada, that have their own different protocol for what do they call an ototoxicant, what do they call a confirmed ototoxicant, or a possible or a non-conclusive, etc. So that's the first thing that I want to caution you about. So looking at all of their lists, basically what I have on the screen is literally just a starting point, and I want to make that very, very clear. Hopefully you don't see this slide and think, oh, that's the list of ototoxicants. This is literally the starting point for you to go ahead and start looking at all the other chemicals that can be classified as ototoxicants. This is basically the ones that I most commonly see in the literature. Okay, so solvents, metals, and carbon monoxide as an asphyxiant. I believe these are the ones that you're most commonly gonna see, regardless of your source. I'm pretty confident that you're gonna see these. You're gonna see the carbons, the sulfides, the ethyl benzene, styrene, toluene, etc., lead, mercury, and carbon monoxide. And then there's a whole big list of other ones that have potential to be an ototoxicant, nitriles, pesticides, and then it's up to you to look at them, look at the research, look at the entities, look at the sources where they're coming from, and determine whether this is one that you wanna classify as an ototoxicant within your company, or within the clients that you're dealing with, for those of you that are consultants. So again, this is just a starting point. Don't take this as this is the only source of or these are the only chemicals that are determined to be ototoxicants. This is literally just a starting point. And then regarding dual exposure, so you looking at the list, right, of solvents and metals, you can imagine that there's going to be many workplaces. I can think of oil and gas, for example, where you're going to have a lot of solvents and you're also going to have a lot of noise, right? So there's some research around that as well. So when you have that dual exposure, some research indicates that, carbon monoxide along with noise can potentiate the exposure. So that means that it can, the hearing loss can be greater than the two acting on their own, carbon monoxide and noise acting on their own. And there is synergistic effects, right? So additive effect of exposure to toluene and styrene and noise and possibly lead. So if you have dual exposure, carbon monoxide, toluene, styrene, and noise, even if the noise is less than 85 decibels, the occupational exposure limit for noise, you can still have hearing loss. All right, so that, noise at below 85 decibels in combination with exposure to toluene, styrene, or carbon monoxide can lead you to have hearing loss on the workforce. Some research also suggests that physical workload has it's another factor to be contemplated. So if you have a little bit of noise, so noise below 85 decibels, you have an ototoxicant, but your workload it's highly demanding. That could also potentiate or have a synergistic effect on the hearing loss eventually. Let me take a sip of coffee. There's one research paper I found, and again, this is literally just one research paper, but I think it's something to be aware of and take into consideration, that impulse noise actually has a more harmful effect in the presence of on some solvents, right? So impulse noise is going to be more harmful in the presence of ototoxicants than continuous noise. And this just has to do with the mechanisms of hearing loss that I explained. You'll see here the difference between necrosis and apoptosis. So this research paper basically goes, deep dive into those mechanisms and try to explain why impulse noise may be more hazardous to the inner ear when there's dual exposure with noise. So this is my legal advice here. Once again, really take a look at the source of your list of ototoxicants. Look at the protocols that they use, the research that they look, the decision logics that they use to claim a chemical as an ototoxicant or not. Discuss it with your management. Make sure it agrees with your own company procedures or processes for defining hazardous chemicals, and make sure you do your homework before you start classifying ototoxicants in your workplace. Okay. Again, this is an introduction. This is just your starting point for you to go ahead and do some more work on this. Okay. So some of the reasons that we have these discrepancies between entities is because of the research that they're looking at. So for example, one researcher exposed rats to 2,000 ppm of toluene, and then therefore and the rats had hearing loss, and therefore it determined that toluene was an ototoxicant. Well, some other research entity may disregard that paper because they thought, well, in the industry where I'm concerned about, there's not such high exposures to toluene. Nobody's going to be exposed to 2,000 ppm of toluene. So we're going to disregard that paper, where other entities may say, no, we're going to take in that paper and we're going to consider that paper. Some researchers were able to identify mixed chemical exposures where some others were not. Other papers include noise exposures as confounding factors where others may not. Some papers interviewed their subjects and talked about non-occupational exposures to noise, where others didn't. Some including other confounding factors like smoking, because smoke, it is a confirmed ototoxicant. So any of you smokers here, if you needed one more reason to quit smoking, add the fact that they are ototoxicants. Many medications. So workforce. Imagine a worker being exposed to noise, solvents, and taking medications that have ototoxicant effects, right? So this also has to take into account. And what were the study subjects that were included in the research? Were we talking humans, or were we talking animals, where the data has to be extrapolated? So just like any research topic, right? You have to take all these things in consideration, and not everybody sees, not all the entities studying ototoxicants see eye to eye with this. Most of the studies use animal data. It obviously is not human. More studies are going to be biased towards the animals. And then there's obviously going to be differences in sensibilities and hearing frequency, hearing ranges between animals and people. So, researchers also have to take all that into account. And for example, data on rats can be extrapolated to toxicity in humans, more for aromatic solvents than others. So, we have stronger evidence on the solvents that we have on the metals. All this leads to this type of table. I'm going to go through this type of table first. So this is from the Nordic expert group. My colleagues here from Europe I'm sure they're familiar with this, and I'm going to define them, and hopefully I'm going to make an accurate explanation of what they are. My understanding is that this is sort of it acts like the IOHA in the US. So it's a research entity that proposes occupational exposure limits for the European Union. And then the European Union has to admit them as occupational exposure limits or not. So that's kind of part of what they do. So they came up with this research paper in 2012, and they're sort of like making the case that I'm making here. They were comparing the criteria that different entities use. The first one is the Institute for Research in Occupational Safety and Health from Canada. The second column is the European Union Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and then the third one is the Northern Exposure Group. So category 1 for the NEG means that there was human data and that they can highly confirm that this chemical is ototoxicant, where category 3 is their lowest confidence level, basically. Category 3 means we have some data that suggests on animals studies that they may be an ototoxicant. So, this is their lowest level of confidence, where category 1 is the highest level of confidence. So you can take something like mercury, where one entity in Canada, one very highly respected research entity in Canada, is saying, well, we don't know whether mercury it's a ototoxicant, where the European Union and the NEG says absolutely, completely confirmed that it's a ototoxicant. You can say the same thing for carbon disulfide. The Canadian says, well, maybe, where the other two entities say absolutely. Carbon monoxide, the same thing. Maybe the Canadians, and let me go back here to this slide. And I'm not saying this is good or bad, right? Okay, so this is not me saying one entity is better than the other or whatever. I'm just stating facts here. But for example, the Canadians look at 150 studies. They evaluated 100 chemicals, and from that they concluded that only 5 were ototoxicants and 3 were possible. So maybe they have a higher criteria or different criteria. Again, I'm not saying they're better or not. I'm just pointing out this difference to you, so that in your jurisdictions where you live, where you work, you take that into account. Okay, as I'm saying, this is just the starting point for you to start looking into what is considered ototoxicants. This is very recent. This is a research paper from 2023 in the Journal of Occupational Environmental Hygiene. So it came out a few months back. I think it's October, November last year. And you can see sort of like the same type of evaluation, right? You look at one researcher versus Campo et al., which is basically representing the European Union. And now what the ACGIH is doing in the TFDs, they have a specific notation with the OTO for ototoxicants. So just like they have notations for skin, or for sensitizers. Now they started putting special notation for OTO, meaning that this chemical, even though it has the TLV was established because of a target organ that is not the inner ear. It does have, and there's enough evidence there to say that they are also causing damage to the inner ear, even though that was not the organ that was used to establish the occupational exposure limit. So you can see there, and another comparison, ethyl benzene, right here in the middle, ethyl benzene. So one research says it's suspected, the other two says absolutely ototoxicant, hexane, the same discrepancy. You can see it with trimethylthene as well. So again, this is just pointing out that different agencies, different researchers have different criteria, different protocols, and you have to be aware of them, and you have to do your own, you have to take your own decisions, right? And on what are you going to definitely determine to be an ototoxicant and treat it as such in your area of expertise. This slides is just basically saying the same thing that I just said, so I'm just going to skip this one, and then we're going to go into the control measures. In general terms, it's entities that I looked at. They recommend adhering to the hierarchy of control. So as for any other hazard that we encounter in the workplace, we have to talk about the hierarchy of controls. We have to include ototoxics in our risk assessment, and we have to do general campaigns of awareness, right? Not only regarding the ototoxicants, but the dual exposure with noise, and also the effects of medications, right? So how many occupational physicians are actually asking the question to the employees that are exposed to ototoxicants, noise, and medications that have this side effect. So this is probably something that we need to do a lot more education, a lot more awareness, bring our partners in the occupational medicine sector, and make sure that they are addressing these issues with the workforce as well. Okay, controls measures that are specific for this type of substances include in a hearing conservation program workers exposed to ototoxicants at half the occupational exposure limit. Many countries, this is called the action limit, right? Regardless of the presence of noise in their exposure profile. So this is a paradigm shift, right? So imagine now going to your management and saying, hey, we have a similar exposure group that it's above their profile, the exposure profile, it's above 50% for toluene, and we need to do annual audiograms on those folks. What is your management going to say? I think they're very clear. They're being exposed to folks that are exposed to noise. You're exposed to noise, you get them in a hearing conservation program. That means annual or audiograms with a certain periodicity. Researchers are saying you have to do the same thing for people exposed to chemicals, ototoxicants, even if they're not exposed to noise. So take somebody that it's in a lab where there's very, very noise levels, in the 70s. But if they're exposed at the action limit at half the occupational exposure limit for an ototoxicant, now they need to be included in the hearing conservation program. So to me, that's sort of like a paradigm shift. That's something that is, it's going to be completely new for us. It's going to be completely new for our management, but it's something we need to consider. We really want to protect our workforce. There's also recommendations regarding audiograms, so including them in a hearing conservation program. So it can no longer be called a hearing conservation program, right? So there's also a recommendation for periodic audiograms where there is thermal exposure to ototoxicant. So again, an ototoxicant by definition, it can be absorbed through the skin, or it can be inhaled, or it can be ingested. And then creating an awareness program regarding the medical and non-occupational ototoxicants, especially where this dual exposure risk exists. Let's go to the next one. So recommendations where there is dual exposure. Reduce the occupational exposure limit for noise to 80 decibels. So now, if you have people exposed to where the exposure profile is above 80 decibels, now you include them in a hearing conservation program. So think about the effects that could be, right? How many people right now you have in a hearing conservation program because they're exposed to above 85 decibels. And now you have to include a whole bunch more that may be exposed to between 80 and 85, right? So that could be an impact on your program and on your budget, obviously. And to reduce the occupational exposure limit of the ototoxicants of concern. So maybe you have dual exposure in the workplace and you're using 25 ppm for carbon monoxide as an occupational limit. You may lower that to 17.5 ppm for carbon monoxide to then implement corrective actions, right? So that's basically what we're talking about here. I think this is the last recommendation that I have. Remember that we talked about how ototoxicants can affect the auditory nerve. So ototoxicants may not actually reduce the noise levels that you can detect, that your inner ear can detect, but they may affect the nerve, and then you won't be able to interpret that that sound as a clear voice, as many of you are hearing me today. So ototoxicants may not affect the level, the noise, the volume of noise that I'm hearing, but they may be affecting your understanding of the speech. So maybe you can listen to me, but you cannot understand me. You may actually be listening to me as if I have a heavier accent, maybe. Of the conversation may be verbal, right? It may be just distorted. So you can hear me, but you may not understand me. That's what ototoxicants may cause. So your typical pure tone air conduction audiometry may not be enough. It will not detect that type of negative impact to your hearing. That's why you may need another type of audiometric exam that is called the distortion product or acoustic emissions. It's just another type of audiogram that is actually going to test not only the level, the volume of hearing, but also how well may you be understanding speech. And that's also something to think about. So last, I do want to go through some of the references that I use for all this information that you have that I've seen today. I've used the IOHA. They have a 400 page document that talks about ototoxicants, the different effects, the different etiologies, etc. The Institute of Occupational Health and Self Research from Canada as well, and then you saw the document from the Northern Expert Group. They also have a very good document on ototoxicants. for more information and list of ototoxicants, I've also referred to Safe Work Australia. The US Army basically has a long list, a very long list of chemicals they call ototoxicants. So just like some entities, like the Canadian one, could be somewhat restrictive, there's some more entities that just go out and say, well, let's err on the side of safety. I don't know. And I think, anything that has the potential of being an ototoxicant, we're going to include it. I think the U.S. Army has done some of that. Again, I'm not saying one is better than the other. One is right and the other one's wrong. I'm just stating some facts here. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration from the United States, as well as the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health from the Center of Disease Controls from the United States, have very good information on ototoxicants, and obviously also the American Industrial Hygiene Association has put forth some very good documentations and recommendations regarding what to do with ototoxicants. Here's my contact information, and I think we're a little bit short on time, but I think some of the folks in the late time.
No, Eduardo, you have time. You have time.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm glad you are finishing a little early. We still have about half an hour.
Okay.
And there are lots of questions. So continue, please. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's it. So, here's my contact information. That's basically information I want to go through today. So let's hear some questions and hopefully some answers.
Very good. But before we get into the question, this was very interesting subject, Eduardo, and muchas gracias. Thank you. Okay. Let's go through. We have a question from Sigrid. Can welding smoke be ototoxic?
That's a good question. So the question is regarding like a fire from a fire, like a building fire type thing?
No, welding smoke, welding fumes.
Welding fumes. Okay. So out of all the research I read, I didn't find anything related to welding fumes. So we talked about heavy metals, mercury and lead. So some of that can be emitted through welding, but I haven't seen anything specific on welding fumes and their ototoxicity.
Okay, very nice. And then it seems like it's information which is very useful information from Mr. McDermott, which is EUCLP hazard substance AG styrene has a classification H372, which says can cause damage to hearing. So that's just an information which is very useful, and the link is also posted here to hearing organs through prolonged or repeated exposure. So there's an EUCLP classification of H372. Let's look at, that's just an information, so thank you for sharing. Mike Murphy, if the OEL of ototoxicant chemicals already considered these health effects in the OEL setting process, why then adjust the OEL? I don't think it is considered in the test setting process.
That is correct. So what for example, the ACGIH is doing, when they set an occupational exposure limit, they set it based on a specific target organ, right? A specific disease.
Yeah.
No occupational exposure limit has been set based on damage to inner ear. So that's basically saying, a solvent may affect the central nervous system, right? And the occupational exposure limit is set to prevent damage to the central nervous system. But they also recognize that there is damage to the inner ear. So they're just basically saying, in addition to the damage to the central nervous system and the reason for this PEL, in addition to that, we're saying, hey, watch out for their ototoxicity effects.
Francis Wright from Ireland, noise-induced hearing loss from noise exposure is usually visible on the audiometric test graph at 3,000, 6,000 hertz. Is this the same for noise damage caused by exposure to ototoxic chemicals?
It depends on the mechanical, right? And that's why I go through all the etiologies, right? So ototoxicants can have the same effect as noise, but they may not. So noise is not going to affect the auditory nerve, where some ototoxicants will. So it really depends, and I think that's where more research is needed, because it depends on the mechanics of the damage, on whether you can actually detect it with a common audiogram that we use today, or you need to have something else.
Mike Murphy, why 50% of the OEL for the ototoxicants? Why not 10%?
That's a very good question. Why not? Absolutely. Again, I'm not the researcher here. I'm, don't kill the messenger, right? I'm just, providing you the information that I've been reading, the recommendations from some of these entities that I cited at the end.
Yeah.
They talk about 50%. But my goodness, you bring a very good point, Mike. Why stop at 50? Why not 10%? That's a very good point.
Yeah, but let's start somewhere, right?
Yeah,
With 50%. Let's gather the data, and then maybe in future, as opposed to using 100% OEL.
correct.
Mike Murphy again, do you consider peak exposure and half-life of the chemicals in potential impact to hearing versus full shift chemical exposure and hearing loss? Do you want me to read again? It says, do you consider peak exposure and half-life of the chemicals in potential impact to hearing versus full shift chemical exposure and hearing loss? Yeah.
So yeah, so the research is based on mostly on animal studies, right? Very few data on humans. So yeah, we're not talking, we're just talking like research based the effects. I don't think we have enough studies, or we have any studies. We don't even have a dose response curve. And
Yeah.
this is the point that the article from 2023, they are very heavy on that. They make a very, they highlight the fact that we don't even have a dose response curve.
Mm.
So there's no way we can address whether this is full shift or task based exposure versus hearing loss.
Right. And then Francis Wright again, why do chemicals, your example of toluene, causes the localized damage to the inner ear hair cell while noise causes the widespread damage? Perhaps I missed this explanation.
Yeah, that's just basically the mechanics of it. That's earlier in the presentation. And I don't want to go through that explanation again, because it was a little bit complicated. I mean, it took me a while for me to understand it. Hopefully I was able to explain it. But yeah, it just has to do with the mechanics there. Noise works through pressure, so the damage is sweeping, where chemicals have another mechanism, and they go directly at hair cell by hair cell. So they're, it's the damage is more localized, more spotty, rather than sweeping across the bed of the cochlea.
Very nice. You can see there is lots of excitement from the participants. There's one more from Timothy. Are exposure effects from ototoxicants exposure more acute, chronic, or both?
Attributed to acute, chronic, both. Both. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I said, there's one research paper that talks about how impulse noise may be, no, their conclusion is that it is impulse noise. It's more damaging than continuous noise when there is dual exposure with chemicals.
And specific compound is mentioned in this aminoglycosides. I don't know.
I don't even know what that
this?
is. Yeah,
That's
sorry
what I
about
was going to say.
that.
Yeah.
But so the fact that I've never come across that term before, I've never come across that while studying autotoxicants. And I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. But that's probably a good, with some of the research that I've shown you, some of the entities, maybe you can do word search. Like if you go to the EU OSHA document, you can probably do a word search on that and see if they're included as autotoxicants.
So if you have hands up, you can unmute yourself as long as there is no background noise, Dennis, and then explain us, please.
I have to write a research proposal, and we are going to use compost, agricultural compost, in a chemical implant to produce substances for pharma industry using electrical polarization. We are studying about it. But I have to move this compost by workers. And so I'm thinking about aminoglycosides because we make this soil, this compost mature, growing. So this could be a problem because these aminoglycosides certainly will be produced. So I want to make an assessment, and I want to say you must think also about this. You understand what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Looks like
Yeah.
I'm understanding, yeah.
Yeah, any more research on this is welcome. I mean, I think I'll go back to the fact that we don't even have a dose response curve. So
But
the more
EU OSHA could be good as a reference.
yeah, EU OSHA.
I will do. Yeah,
Absolutely.
So I will do this way. Thank you.
Yeah, not only EU OSHA, but also the Northern Exposure Group and the IRSST from Canada. I think those three entities have, from what I've seen, there could be other stuff out there. From what I've seen, they have it's the highest level of research compilation. So like I said, I mean, they have documents that are 200, 300, 400 pages only about autotoxicants. Like, for example, Safe Work Australia, they have good documentation, but it's only sort of like summaries. These three entities have very large documents. You can look them up and then do a word search and find out whether there is someone that has been studied and complement what you're doing.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
if people would like to ask the question in Spanish language, you can also ask anyone from participants. English is fine, but Eduardo does speak Spanish also fluently. We have a judge of, it seems like control measures should not be linked to OEL percentage at all if OEL had no consideration for ototoxicity when it was set. It would make sense to reduce exposure to ototoxicant as low as reasonably practical in the absence of full data. Yeah, makes sense.
No question about it. And that's why I
Yeah.
start the controls talking about the hierarchy of controls, right? When the control section of the presentation, make sure that we get the hierarchy of control set. Hey, why not start with eliminating the chemical or substituting the chemical and using another one, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Next question is there a written guideline? This is from Wilson from Iowa on autotoxic chemical with criteria for risk assessment and inclusion of workers in the hearing conservation program. I can answer that Iowa currently does not have, but Iowa has now started a scientific committee. Currently, this committee is evaluating the sensors which are used. We can, Eduardo, have ototoxicant group also as a part of Iowa, where people from around the world can come together, okay, and then provide guidance document to the IOHA community. We can think about it.
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Matthew,
I'd like
go
to
ahead.
mention Matthew. Matthew tells us
Yeah.
that very nice to hear from you, Matthew, as well. Read you. This is International Noise Awareness Day. I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, is it so?
That's
Oh,
what
it's a
Matthew's
noise
telling
awareness
us.
day. We didn't know this.
So
Right.
how come we didn't know this?
Yeah, it is. It is. So it's a great coincidence. So
Yeah.
good.
Fantastic.
Thanks,
I wish
Eduardo.
we could say, no, thank you, Matthew. I wish we could
We
say
could
we
have
planned it
announced
this
this.
way.
Yeah, we could have pitched. Yeah. We have lots of questions. Said, when using chemicals product, how to preserve our ears if it is ototoxicants? No,
Yeah,
just
we went
reduce
over
the
the similar
exposure.
recommendations, controls there, yeah.
Yeah. Is there any particular screening test for different noise-induced versus chemical-induced hearing loss? And I think Eduardo
So,
did talk about. Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
only when it affects the auditory nerves. So there's a type of audiogram that would actually measure the effects on the auditory nerve that causes us to be able to not to be able to understand speech. We can listen at the volume, but we cannot understand it. So there's a different type of audiometric test for testing that.
Jody is asking, do all ototoxicants cause auditory nerve damage that affects the ability to understand speech? Yeah.
Yeah, no. It depends. It depends on genetics. It depends on the person. It depends on the chemical. That level of detail it's not known. So it's not like we can. It's not like we can say solvent X causes auditory nerve damage and solvent Y causes damage to the tensor tympani muscle. We know that there's these different mechanisms from hearing loss. We know chemicals act in this way, but it's highly variable on how the chemicals actually going to cause the hearing damage on a particular person. That's a
And
very
Bina
good question.
Patel, yeah, great. I'm telling you, it's such a great and engaging question. I mean, we all are learning.
Yep.
Bina Patel is asking, are ototoxicants regulated anywhere in the world?
So, like for example, regulated. So if we think about regulations, I don't. I mean, I can point to, like, for example, what the ACGIH is doing, which is they're placing their a notification for ototoxicity. So they're making you aware of this.
Mm.
I don't know that the OSHA has documents on this. So OSHA is a regulatory agency in the United States. So they don't have PELs, occupational exposure limits, permissible exposure limits associated specifically to ototoxicants. So I don't know that they are regulated anywhere. I know that there are many recommendations for implementation of controls when they're acting by themselves or when they're exposed by themselves or with dual exposure, but I don't know that they are actually regulated because of their ototoxicity.
Yeah, Matthew, thank you for inserting some of the information. All right, seems like are there exposure levels more like exposure standard instead of 10, 50, etc. of the exposure standard? Shouldn't the emphasis be on managing or mitigating exposure due to the, so that's what we talked about before. They reduce the exposure as low as feasible. We have Harvard.
The same comment, sorry, from Mahershi, but the same comment from Jans. And Jans, hi, how are you? Nice to see you here. But it's the same thing, right? So if the OELs was not considered when you set if ototoxicity was not considered when you set the occupational exposure limit, why adjust it to half? Matthew said, 10%. Others had said, as low as reasonable possible. So yeah, I think those are very, very good points.
We have with all benzene derivative present on the list of ototoxicant, is there a strong correlation between ototoxic and neurotoxic substances, as it appears several ototoxic substances damage the hearing nerve? Good question.
Yeah, I haven't seen that addressed specifically, but it certainly makes sense, right? That's that to make that connection certainly makes sense.
All right, and maybe the last question. Most of the ototoxic chemicals cause other health hazards. So respiratory production, if you may already be limiting the absorption leading to hearing loss. Are there chemicals that exclusively cause hearing loss?
I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think ototoxicity it's not exclusive to a particular chemical. I think this is chemicals just affecting just like many chemicals, right? We know that chemicals have effects on different organs. Occupational exposure limit establishing entities kind of pick one and say, this is the one that we have the most research on, or this is the one this is the illness that is more severe. So we're going to focus on establishing the limit to stop that illness or to stop the effect on that chemical, on that target organ, knowing that it's going to affect different other organs, in this case, including the inner ear.
All right, so what we would like to do is, we may have more questions, but before we end the webinar, Rita will take a photo. If everyone can turn on their video, and we can see you, and Rita will take a screenshot. And typically, yeah, it's great to see everyone. Yeah, look at this. Yeah, very nice. I can see the global presence, diversity. I can see all over the world now that we are seeing. Okay, good. So Rita will, Rita, are you there?
Hi, Maharshi, I'm here, but I'm just battling to get a good view. Just give me a minute.
Yeah, you do it. So this is exciting time. So thank you, Eduardo. What we would like to do is just remember, especially I didn't realize the noise, whatever protection day today. So, Rita will do.
So we've got a lot of participants. It's really
107
small.
will not fit on one screen, right?
So I'm going to try my very best. If all of you can give me a nice big smile, that would be good. So 1, 2, 3. Thank you. I've got it.
Very nice. All right. Very good. So this is
say Ototoxicants.
Yeah, very nice. So let's see if there are any other questions. Otherwise, we can. Muchas gracias. Oh, we are hearing lots of good feedback. So yeah, give the feedback on how can we improve. Excellent and very nice presentation. Very nice. Yeah. All right, we have answered most of the questions. So thank you all for joining, and keep attending, keep looking at the LinkedIn post, keep looking at IOHA communication through your member associations, and continue to participate. One more time, if you have any suggestion on what other webinars we can do, please let us know. And if you would like to speak at any of the webinar, also let us know. And what I would like to do is give you a link to IOHA 2024. So in June, there is a conference in Dublin, and registration is still open. I'm inserting a link here. I would like you to Maybe Rita can take some few more screenshot as people are showing up. But so that is the link that I have just inserted here. Please review the link, plan to join the conference in Dublin. There are 20 PDCs, and if you are attending the IOHA 2024 conference, the PDCs are free, and it's on first come, first serve basis. So think about the conference, and if you do come to Dublin, I'm sure Francis and I will be seeing you there, and many others who from Ireland who are attending the program today. All right, everyone. So thank you so much, everyone, and we will see can to be shared for presentation. As I mentioned, we will share this presentation to IOHA members. A login page is being created, and therefore, if you're a member of any association, we will include this. Do you send the attendees any written verification of attendance? We normally don't, but if it helps you for a certification maintenance point or something, just reach out to Rita and me, and maybe we can send that you have attended this session. Okay. Alrighty, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
so much,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you,
Bye bye.
Eduardo.
Bye.
Sure, Rita, take care. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Eduardo.
Appreciate your attendance. Thank you. Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you, all.
Thank you.
Much, Mr. Marcy.